Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Board with Each Other Bite Size, the spin off podcast from Board with Each Other that looks at small games and expansions. So, today we are going to be looking at our first expansion in the series. We'll tend to only look at expansions that change the core game enough to warrant a conversation, but in this case, I think it is most definitely warranted, as today we are going to be looking at Dune Imperium, The Rise of Ix.
Also known as the Rise of It.
Yep, officially known as The Rise of Ick in this household. And Dune Imperium, Immortality. As always, I'm joined by my co-host, my wife, and player two, Anna Kelly.
Hi, guys.
We are going to split these up to a certain extent. I think it's worth talking about each one in turn, and we will give them an overall score at the end. But with these bite size, we don't tend to go into all of our scoring criteria as we normally do. We might touch on a lot of the same points if relevant, but we don't go as in depth. As always, if you want more, you crave more content, then please do check out our monthly review podcast where we go really deep dive into the games that we review. These tend to be a little bit more snappy.
And if we're clever enough, we might even link the episode of Dune, the original.
You're asking way too much of my technical capabilities here.
We'll try.
We'll try. So let's start with the first expansion to Dune Imperium, which is Rise of X. It's the larger of the two, and it makes the more significant changes. And I think with expansions, it's probably worthwhile just going through briefly what it adds to the game or what it changes. So Rise of X, alongside...
Rise of It.
Okay, Rise of Egg. We're just going to call it that for the rest of the episode, are we? Adds, as you'd expect from an expansion, it adds more leaders, it adds more cards to the Imperium row, your standard sort of thing. But what it also adds is a new board and an overlay to the existing board. So you have an overlay that basically replaces the trading section on the top right of the original Dune Imperium board with a shipping track to represent your engagement with the merchants, Spacing Guild. That's it. It also adds a new board at the bottom, which allows you to buy tech tiles. These can be purchased for spice by sending an agent to one of the new board spaces, and they either have an effect at the end of the game, an ongoing effect every turn, or you have something that you can activate once per round to have a particular effect. You can also buy dreadnoughts,
Dun, dun, dun.
or as we like to call them, dick ships.
Because
And dreadnoughts are extremely powerful troops, for want of a better term. They count as 3 combat strength instead of your 2 combat strength you get from your normal troops. And if you win a combat with them, you get to place them over. You get to control places on the board, which gives you extra money and extra spice as you go along.
And notably, ordinarily when you commit troops to a conflict, at the end of them they're spent and they go back into your pile. Yep. Dick ships don't. Dick ships stay.
Dick ships are forever, not just for Christmas. So those are
birthdays and anniversaries.
Those are basically the additions and changes to the gameplay. Everything else sort of stays at its core the same.
Yep.
So where to start with this one, really?
So I think one of the things that certainly as a 2-player game of Dune is things could be very, very heated. You're often fighting over the same board space, and I imagine again when you've got more players, that's the same case. Whereas by having the shipping track, that allows a bit more freedom, I think, about how you win, and money becomes
more usable.
More usable. What would happen in a lot of games of Dune vanilla, if you like, is you would end up with huge big piles of cash with no way of being able to really meaningfully spend it.
Fat stacks that do nothing.
Yeah. Whereas in this case, actually,
with the dreadnoughts, there's more places to spend money. Yeah. There's more use, and there's a lot more cards that you get through the Imperium row that interact with money.
Mm-hmm.
So they definitely, it addresses one of the issues in the first game. But as Hannah says, it also opens up new paths to victory.
Mm-hmm.
So it does mean, in some ways, particularly in a 2-player game, you can actually be in each other's faces less, to a certain extent, because you have more options. But with those more options comes the ability, in my opinion, to really mess up your game.
Mm-hmm.
Because it becomes more tempting to spread yourself too thin and not concentrate on anything enough.
Yeah.
And you end up just giving your opponent the victory because you're trying to be a jack of all trades.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the interaction with the leaders becomes more important when you include this.
Mm-hmm.
Because you need to concentrate on what you're good at, and you need to sort of keep yourself not completely blinded, but blinkered, but there is that propensity to go off after red herrings constantly, which I've done in a couple of games. I know I have, particularly when we first cracked it out. I got very excited about all the shiny new things and basically just didn't do anything.
I do think what's really cool though is that some of the leaders have some really cool abilities that are slightly more complex than the original sort of base vanilla game. But again, if you understand the mechanism behind them,
Mhm.
that can be really satisfying and really fun to play
Oh yeah,
and lean into it.
the new leaders are one of my favourite components of
Hmm.
it. Particularly my homie Helena Richese, who's my favourite character in the game now. There's some really really powerful ones, but like you say, some of them do go to definitely go more complex. The base game had a complexity rating of 1 to 3 on all the different leaders. There's some fours in here, so there are some that are quite tricky. Another cool mechanic that it does introduce is some cards allow you to send agents to spaces that are already occupied, which I'm not 100% sure, but I'm pretty sure was not in the base game.
Mm-mm.
That's a new mechanic. Which again, less important in a two-player game, but I imagine for more multiplayer games starts to become very tactically vital
Yeah.
to utilize.
So quite often you will end up, or I found myself, even in our two-player games, desperately trying to get onto one of the slots where I can buy my additional agent
Yeah,
or seat on the council. Well, actually, that now enables us to be able to do that potentially. Whereas I imagine if you got really unlucky, you could be waiting the entire game to do that.
yeah, absolutely. And the tech tiles, I think, add a very, very deep mechanic to additional mechanic
Mm.
to it. I really like the tech tiles.
I don't play with them so
No,
much as
you
you
tend to
do.
leave them alone.
Yeah,
There's some that are just exceptional. If you get the right thing to put with your leader and what you're trying to achieve in the game, it's an absolute game breaker. They're really, really good. But it is like anything, it is a distraction because they all cost spice, and that's spice that you normally be saving up to spend on a big whack of
troops
troops
or
or you know. So it is you sort of have to commit to that. But I think if you, going back to vanilla, 99% of games, I would get the additional agent. I would get a seat on the council. Not so much. The last game we played was the first game I think I've ever played with this that I didn't actually bother.
don't think either of us got a seat on the council.
No, didn't bother.
Yeah.
So it's interesting. So it shows that there's, usually that would be an absolute must-have, but it just gives you a lot more options.
Hmm.
The cards in general, the editions are all really cool, really great. I don't think there's anything quite as powerful as the Posich Haderach, the original one, but there are some very powerful cards, new ones in there, which are really, really cool to crack out when you get them. Lowball intrigue cards, I didn't mention, which
Yep. And
again,
also, I think a bit more diversity with the entry cards as well. So they do more
yeah,
stuff
there's
and
some
they have
funkier things
more
in there.
impact on gameplay.
Mm.
So it's not just about committing additional troops or trading for influence in a certain faction.
From the two-player perspective, the House Hadal, the AI, they've been quite careful not to spread that much thinner. So the interactions you have with that is they will start to the AI will start to implement dreadnoughts,
Dick ships.
yeah, big ships, and it also interacts with the shipping track purely to get more troops out on the board,
Yeah.
just as a bit of a spoiler. And I think
But
they've,
also to block you from using the shipping trap as well,
yeah,
because the shipping
yeah,
trap can be really powerful.
it can
Again,
be, yeah.
you use it a lot more than I do, but
And again, one of the things that I really like about the shipping track is it makes your influence with the Spacing Guild much, much more important because
hmm
once you get to 2 influence in the Spacing Guild, which I used to ignore a lot of the time, you can then go to a different space on the shipping track, which gets you two moves up the track as such instead of one.
so it becomes more powerful.
Yeah. So again, they sort of looked at the areas of the board or tactically that were weaker and have tried to buoy those up, and I think it's worked fantastically. I think out of all the expansions to board games that I've played, this is my favourite.
The Rise of X
Yeah,
specifically.
the Rise of It specifically.
See, it's funny because we haven't talked about it yet, but the other one I think I prefer.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Okay, interesting. Well, we'll get onto that in a minute. But
Quieten down, Hannah. We're not there
we're
yet.
not there yet. No, that's fine. For my money, this is essential.
So how much is a retail for? I mean,
30 quid.
yeah, I think that's pretty good as far as price points go.
It's big as far as the expansions
Yeah,
go.
it
There's a
is,
lot
and it
to
does
it.
change gameplay quite considerably. And I do think the experience of playing June with the Rise of It is a far better experience than playing June vanilla.
Yeah, and that's saying a lot because Dune Vanilla is
It's
one of my favorite
awesome.
games. It's
Yeah.
awesome. But yeah, I am a bit of an expansion freak. I love a good expansion. This is the only one I think I would classify as an absolute must buy.
Interesting.
I think it's essential to the experience. I think it adds so much without taking anything away. Whereas in a lot of other expansions, I tend to find that there's a bit of a push pull with becoming overwrought or over complex.
Yeah, because I mean, if you think about it, what was originally there, the overlay for the top right corner where you have the space with the
Mm,
trading section. Actually, no, we never very
no,
rarely used that. It was only when we had spare yellow symbols and we didn't have anywhere else to go. Whereas this actually makes that meaningful,
it does.
have an impact on gameplay, help you achieve,
Yeah,
your end goals.
it feels almost like a patch to a video game
Yeah,
that just adds loads of new stuff and plugs all the holes that were there before.
that's a good way of describing it.
And it does. It fixes every slight niggle I had with June in the
Hmm.
first place, and June is a 9 out of 10 for me.
Hmm.
This makes it a 10 out of 10.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean, my score 9.
yeah. I think
Yeah.
I'd be happy with that. I would
Mm.
never go back to playing Dune without it.
No, which is very telling.
Yeah.
Um, okay, shall we talk a little bit about Immortality then?
Yes.
So Immortality is a smaller expansion.
Hmm.
It's still fairly weighty. I think it retails for about 20, 23, 24 quid most of the time. Um, and what Immortality adds is, again, another board. So it
It
adds,
begins to take up quite a lot of space.
yeah, it does. When you include both, it does start to become quite a table hog. But you get another board, which is basically a research track. So it's to represent your engagement with the, and I'm probably going to murder this in the pronunciation, Tleilaxu, who work on forbidden genetic manipulation technology in the Dune universe. And how it works essentially is you have a new card that gets included in your starting deck, which with a new icon, which is
Which replaces June card.
yeah, June the Spy,
Spy.
the Desert Planet,
Desert Planet, that's it.
June the Desert Planet replaces those. You get two of them to replace the two Desert Planet ones. And on that card, it has a microscope icon. Every time you get a microscope icon, you move across a branching track on this new board. And that will either get you specimens, which go into a bank. You take one of your troops and put it in the bank, or it gets you
Scarab Beetle.
scarabs, which progresses you on another track up at the top, which basically gets you entry cards, victory points, and spice, depending on how far along you go on the track. During the reveal phase, when you buy cards, you can use your specimens to buy cards from a new marketplace. And they tend to range between 1 and 4 specimens. One of the mechanics that pretty much all of those cards use, and one of the main new mechanics in Immortality, is card grafting.
Mm-hmm.
What that means is if you have a card in your hand that says graft, you play it alongside another card from your hand. So you essentially play 2 cards in one turn. You can choose which of the agent markers to use, but it usually has well, not usually, always has a sort of embellishment effect on the card that you're playing, or if you graft it with something, it gets a positive. They're usually very, very powerful.
Yeah.
But the downside is you're playing 2 cards instead of one,
Mm-hmm.
so your reveal turn on the rest of your turns they're going to be weaker. It also introduces an overlay to the research station,
Mm-hmm.
which is a spot you can go on the board, and basically that just means now when you go there, you get one of those microscope resources.
And you get cards as well, don't you?
Yeah, you always did, but it just
Okay.
it became more. And again, underutilized space in both the base game and Rise of X. So plugging yet another gap that they've seen. It doesn't add any new leaders. It does add quite a few more cards to the Imperium deck, and it also adds something called a family atomics counter. Basically, that is a counter that each player gets at the start of the game, and you can use it once per game to wipe the Imperium marketplace and replace it with new cards.
So that can be really handy if there's something on the row that your opponent wants and you don't want them to have it, or conversely,
Yeah,
where we've had games where we have
6s and 7s
six
out the
and
start,
sevens
and that's
from the
it.
start, and
Yeah,
it becomes almost impossible to then build up your deck
yeah,
because you're just locked into this very impenetrable
yeah.
marketplace.
And that's such a small and neat thing that I think you should just house rule it if you're playing with any
Yeah.
version. It should have been there from the start, really. I don't know why it wasn't. So yeah, it has less of an impact on the game than X does. However, again, if you're playing with both of them, you start to get spread even thinner.
Yeah, and I think that's what I really love about it because it then becomes your route to victory becomes so disparate. And whilst it can still be really close, and
Mm.
we still have really
Oh,
nail
you still have
biting
very
games.
nail biting close games, yeah.
There are games where one person does like shoot into the lead because
Mm.
actually, someone has spread themselves too thin, or it just allows you a bit more freedom, I think.
It does, and I've noticed. I think a lot of the mechanics in it, particularly with the very powerful card grafting cards from
Mm,
the say Lexu marketplace, can mean people start to come from behind late, really, really hard in a way
mm,
that they don't tend to with the others. So you've already mentioned that this is your favourite of the two. Do you
mm.
want to talk a bit about why?
Um, I think because with even definitely with vanilla, but
Mm,
even with the rise of Ick, there was a path to victory,
mm,
and you did still have to follow that path to victory.
mm,
You had to do this, you had to do that, and then you could start worrying about
mm,
conflicts and and getting your victory points that way. Whereas this, I think, completely turns that on its head,
mm.
and that's what I like about it. And knowing when to exploit perhaps the other tracks,
Yeah, yeah.
and knowing when actually no, I need to pull back and I need to focus on something
Mm,
else. And I like that.
mm,
And I like that we don't necessarily feel so loggerheads
hmm.
all the time competing over the same resources.
Yeah,
Whereas I used to find that occasionally frustrating, although also again it did add to that competitive nature to it, I
yeah,
think. So
yeah,
it is a bit of
yeah.
a
I
split.
agree.
I also think some of those grafted cards are really cool
Yeah, the grafter cards
and
are
they're
really,
really
really cool.
powerful. And when it works, you're just like, yeah.
Yeah, no, absolutely. When you get them to pop as
Mm,
such, they are incredible. Like some of them
mm.
are really, really good.
And
Um,
I would also say because of that, deck thinning becomes more important.
it does,
Whereas
yeah,
I think previously it didn't really matter and I wasn't really that fussed about thinning out my deck.
yeah,
Whereas now, actually, cards really do have to matter and really count. Or maybe that's because I'm getting a better player, I don't know.
yeah. Probably well, a bit of both, really. I imagine.
Mm.
But I appreciate what you're saying. I think it's true. I think with the card crafting stuff and the different ways to get cards, your deck can bloat a little bit quite
Hmm.
quickly. So I think it again it raises the importance of being able to trash cards.
That's one thing that we haven't mentioned. So one of the expansions introduced new rules about trashing cards and trash
Oh
values and stuff. And I
yeah, I
guess that's
can't.
Rise of It.
I think it's Ryzovic, but there's a new mechanic that was introduced that you cards do certain things if you discard them or trash them.
Yeah,
So some of them, if you discard this card, you get this bonus. Or some
yeah.
of them, if you trash this card, you get this X bonus. Which again is quite
Powerful when
tricky
you're
to pull
playing
off.
with certain houses as well.
Oh yeah, but if you've got a house that leans into that sort of hand
Yeah,
and deck management side of things, they become incredibly
and
powerful,
powerful.
and especially if you can get them to line up in the deck building space.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, from my side, I love this as well. I don't think it's essential in the way that Rise of Rise
Rise
of
of It.
Ick is. Um,
Rise of Dick, maybe. Rise of Dick shit.
Rise of Diction. There's an episode title right there. I think I love it, and I don't think I've got a could take it or leave it approach because I really enjoy including it in the games. But if you were going to go for one and wanted to pump the brakes a little bit on over complexity, I would definitely go with Rise of Egg over Immortality.
Yeah, and I think that's also an interesting point as well because I definitely find the purple one, Immortality, that's
Yeah,
it. I find that does add more complexity to the
it does.
game.
Yeah,
Even just being able to, again, more iconography, also
yeah,
understanding how grafting works. I found it took me longer to get my head around that rather than the Rise of Ick, which was fairly straightforward
yeah.
and kind of that was okay.
It has some trickier concepts than you'd find
Hmm.
elsewhere. I think the thing that swings it for me is while we've never done this, I think playing with the base game in Immortality, I would miss Rise of Vic way more. I would miss Rise of Vic way more than I'd miss Immortality playing with the base game and Rise of Vic,
Yeah, I can understand that.
which makes me feel like Rise of Vic is the superior of the two for my money anyway.
Yeah, I just have more fun playing
Yeah,
it.
no, that's absolutely fair enough.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely. So on that basis, I'd probably give Immortality an 8 as opposed to Rise of Vic's 9.
can I not give it a 9 as well?
If you like, it's your
I would.
scoring.
I would
I'm
give
not the
it a 9.
scoring police. That's the internet.
Yeah, just because I think I have more fun playing with
Yeah,
that.
fine.
But it definitely does ramp the complexity up, and I would put that out there. It's taken me longer to get my head
Yeah,
around it. So if you find Dune complicated,
On the borderline of what you're willing to take.
yeah, you probably
Approach with
don't.
caution.
Yeah,
Yeah,
you
approach with
probably are not
caution.
going to be interested in
Definitely.
this.
Okay. Well, I think we should wrap this up because we definitely get into normal episode length territory if we bang on much more. But to sum up, they are both incredible expansions that make a
Excellent
amazing
game.
game almost perfect, in my opinion. And you can't go wrong with them. Highly recommend. Board with each other's stamp of approval overwhelmingly. So thank you very much for joining us. We hope you enjoyed it. As I said before, if you want to explore some of our longer form content or the original Dune Imperium review to go as a companion piece to this, then feel free to dive in. Until next time, be good to each other, have fun, and play lots of board games.